It being 6 o'clock, I call the August 2024 Town of Clayton Planning Board to order. For roll call.
Thank you, Chair Moore. We'll go ahead and do a roll call, starting with Chair Moore.
Present.
Member Williams. Board Member Lee. Here. Board Member Applewhite. Here. Board Member Lipscomb.
Present.
Board Member Dupree.
Here.
Board Member Gleason.
Here.
Board Member Sarowski.
Here.
And Board Member Anita Bland is excused. Board Member Spence. And Councilwoman Andrea Archer will be joining us in about 15 minutes.
Thank you.
So we do have a quorum. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I am James Ward, the chair of the Town of Clayton Planning Board. This planning board is composed of volunteer members of the public appointed by the Clayton Town Council and is responsible for providing recommendations on key amendments to the zoning and the code of ordinances, including text amendments, rezonings, and conditional zoning districts. Any decision made here tonight is a recommendation for the Town Council and will ultimately be decided by that body. While we welcome public involvement and discourse, please wait until invited to speak by the chair. Prior to addressing the board, speakers are asked to provide their full name and address. Speakers will be allowed a maximum time of 3 minutes and may be asked to stop if they go over. May we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. The next item on the agenda is item 2. Are there any adjustments to the agenda?
No adjustments to the agenda, sir.
Thank you. If there are none, we'll move on to item 3, the approval of the minutes from the April 22nd, 2024 meeting. Are there any corrections to the minutes needed? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Board Member Dupree. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Board Member Applewhite. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item is approval of the minutes from the June 24th, 2024 meeting. Are there any corrections to the minutes needed? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Board Member Dupree. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Board Member Applewhite. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. The next item on the agenda is public meeting. Item 4A, UDOTA 2-24. The presenter is Chad Meadows, the consultant with Code Right Planners. We're now here from Mr. Meadows.
Good evening.
Hey, everybody.
Good evening, Chad. Just a quick introduction from staff. We're going to have Audrey Deschen introduce you, Chad.
Very good.
Hi everyone. I'm a new face here, so for those who don't know me, I'm a senior planner here for the Town of Clayton since 2 months. So it's my first planning board tonight, but it's not my first planning board in my life. So it's been 7 years I'm a planner. So it's amazing to be here tonight, and I'm looking forward to work with all of you. So today we have proposed amendments for the UDO, which is our ordinance we're working with. It's a really important document, and to assure that that document is living with our work, we have to be sure that this document is logical, and when we're applying the UDO, we have to make sure that for any applicant, the UDO will be easy to use. And for us, will be easy to explain. And we're believing in our UDO, so that's a living document. It needs revisions. And Chad here tonight with Cartwright is here to talk to you about those amendments.
All right. Thank you, Audrey. Hi, everybody. Good evening, Mr. Chair, commission members. I'm Chad Meadows with CodeWright, and it's my pleasure to be before you tonight. We have tonight, first off, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Very good. Very good. So this is our second round of UDO amendments. You may recall we had our first round earlier this year. And this is the second round of amendments. I'm going to talk very, very briefly about the amendment process in general, just a quick refresher for everybody. Talk about tonight's objective, which is provision of a recommendation by Planning Board, subject to whatever questions or considerations you guys might want to have. I'll go over the amendments included in this round, and then we'll go to next steps. So, as Audrey mentioned, the UDO is a living document. It's always changing. We are on a quarterly update process, and we're bunching amendments in groups. And, you know, this is part of the first sort of group of amendments. There are a series of comments from the public that were provided during the drafting phase of the UDO. We have gotten around to it incorporating many of those. There's probably one more round of amendments that will address the stragglers, but by and large, we've cast the net broadly and picked up comments that were received during the initial UDO process. Obviously, statutory and policy changes are always something that come up, and as staff is applying the standards, we're finding adjustments, the need for clarification, et cetera. So those have found their way into here as well. A few words on the amendment process, how we identify edits. This is the summary table. Staff assembles a summary table of each omnibus text amendment. It's organized in a table like you see on your screen. This round UDO TA 224 has about 28 pages. There's about 115 or so amendments. This is our tracking mechanism. It allows us to keep track of who made the comment, when, for what reason. How we have suggested disposing of the issue or the comment. You'll also note that in your UDO TA 224 file, the series of red lines on the UDO text amendments, there are footnotes, and each of those footnotes correspond to one of the table rows in the UDO 224 summary table. So there's a great deal of information available and background about why a particular amendment has been proposed, by whom, and so forth. So that's how we identify things. We have a pretty robust system of tracking edits. We incorporate a UDO amendments table at the front of the UDO. It's updated each time we go through an amendment. We track the ordinance number, the date that it was adopted. Obviously, there's the page footers down at the bottom right-hand corner of your UDO that identifies the last update. If you see on the screen here, the last update is dated 9/16/24, which is the anticipated adoption date for UDO TA 224. And then finally, we incorporate a series of editor's notes into the text so that when there are changes that are adopted by town council, those editor's notes reflect those changes, which ordinance number was associated with them, and the date that it was approved. So a variety of different sort of mechanisms and approaches to tracking things. In terms of how we review, we always assemble a detailed red line document of the UDO that should have been provided to planning board members. Every amendment is tracked. New text is red, removed text is blue. If text is moved, it's coded as green. And then I mentioned earlier the footnotes. So that's the quick thumbnail of the amendment process, how we prepare these things, how we track them, and so forth. So with that, Tonight's objective, go over these amendments with the planning board, discuss any potential revisions you'd like to see, obtain a recommendation, hopefully for approval. But we're, obviously here to discuss and review. So UDO TA 224, 111 changes. That sounds like a lot, but we should be able to move through these fairly quickly. They're organized into 7 different groups. Got a handful of administrative or non-substantive changes, some revisions to procedures, districts, uses, infrastructure, development standards is by far the largest set of changes, and then finally a handful of minor definitional changes. So with that, I am going to jump in. Here we go. Administrative non-substantive. These are minor changes to terms, terminology, addressing typos, etc. So, for example, the current UDO uses the phrase building inspector after working with staff. We need to change that title to inspections director. And so you see on the screen pages 34, 37, 48, 63, 65, and 516. Those are all the pages in the red line document where the word building inspector is swapped to read now inspections director. We've removed references to the riparian buffer procedures. You may recall the initial adopted version of the UDO incorporated more substantial riparian buffer provisions. The engineering department wasn't comfortable and wanted to clarify that the state administers the riparian buffer standards, permits, enforcement, etc. Asked us to remove riparian buffer procedures, which we did. And then there are a couple of stragglers in this round of amendments where we still had a reference to a riparian buffer procedure, pages 54, 145, 146. Number 3, gosh darn it, complementary to complementary, with an E, not with an I. And so, while these standards are wonderful and our readers are beautiful, we don't need to complement them. We want our standards to be similar in nature or beneficially constructed. And so we're going to go with complementary with an E. Those changes occur to 14, 218, 430, and the other pages you see there. Had a handful. There were 5 instances of either a misspelled word or a missing conjunction or an extra word that was included in a sentence. And you see the pages where those changes are set down. Finally, we've updated some images. Graphics are a very important part of the ordinance. However, the text controls. And there were 4 instances where we had some imagery that wasn't quite properly tailored to what was in the codified text. We've made adjustments to those images, updated them so that they consistently follow the text. Not necessarily any substantive change to the text associated with those images, just making sure that those two are in alignment. And that is the gist of the administrative non-substantive changes. Any questions on those? Okay, let's talk about procedures. We've added the inspections director, who has some responsibility for making determinations of the UDO text as it pertains to building permits and COs. The land disturbance permit had a mandatory pre-application conference. We've revised that and made that optional instead. Current UDO calls for the planning director to decide alternative sign plans. An alternative sign plan is a request to deviate from a signage standard. As initially drafted, that was going to go to the planning director. After thought, discussion, etc., the decision has been made to suggest that town council be the body delegated to decide an alternative sign plan following receipt of a recommendation from the planning director. So that's a change that we're suggesting on pages 50, 118, and 119. Driveway permit. So these are not required for access to a private roadway. However, we do want to require that when development that is seeking to access a private road does take place, that it be subject to a zoning compliance permit approval. So we wanted to add that clarification. On page 83, we also wanted to soften the standards and allow a construction professional instead of a professional engineer to be able to prepare the driveway permit application for access to a private road. So simplifying those situations just a little bit. If you've got a driveway permit on a state road or a town street, well, that's a different matter. You do need a driveway permit, and that needs to be prepared by a PE, but not these access ways to a private street. Final plat recordation. We softened the language here. So town policy over the course of the past decades has allowed either the staff or an applicant to record a final plat with a register of deeds. And so we've carried that forward, we've clarified it, but we've softened the current provisions that say if you as an applicant record a final plat but don't provide a copy of that to the planning staff, the current regulation says your final plat expires, and that's a little heavy-handed. What we have suggested instead is inclusion of a caveat that says, hey, if you want to record your final plat, that's great. Be sure to send us a copy. If you don't, we might not be able to approve any subsequent site plan or zoning compliance permit on that property, since we won't have any record of the final plat recordation. So stopping short of an expiration provision and more of a caveat. Performance guarantees. These are methods for applicants to secure conditions of certificates of occupancy or final approvals without completing everything on their site plan or all required standards, subject to posting some kind of performance bond, guarantee, surety, etc. So staff's been working with this and noticed the need to add landscaping to the list of features that could be subject to a performance guarantee, to remove sedimentation or erosion control features from the kinds of things that could be subject to a performance guarantee. In other words, those need to be provided. And then finally, if an applicant seeks a performance guarantee after they've received the approval on their development, as sometimes happens, schedules change, problems arise, etc., and an applicant may need to request a performance guarantee, a little bit of extra time to complete some aspect of the approval. If that request is put forth after the site plan or the zoning compliance permit is approved, then it would be town council, not the planning director, who decides that performance guarantee request. Okay, TIA, that's a transportation impact analysis. Right now, the language is phrased in the procedure that says that the engineering director will decide one of these, and that's not entirely accurate. Instead, what the town's engineering director does is that they either accept or do not accept a transportation impact analysis that's prepared by a third party. They can accept it because it's properly done and the outcome is consistent with the engineering director's thoughts about the application. They could choose not to accept it because it doesn't meet minimum standards, etc. It's not in accordance with the engineering director's guidance on what a TIA needs to include. But we wanted to clarify that this is not a decision process. It's either an accept or not accept. Note that an application can still be denied based on a TIA. So while there's no decision on the analysis itself, the outcome of the analysis can still be used by the town as a reason for denying an application. A couple more minor adjustments to the procedures. We've added a family subdivision certification statement. When you have a subdivision approved, there's a series of blank templated statements that you have to include on the face of the plat for various people to sign, like the subdivision administrator or the surveyor or the register of deeds, etc. We've included a family subdivision certification statement for subdivisions where one family member wishes to pass a lot to another immediate family member. So there's a certification statement for that. Finally, Under procedures, we've tried to add a little bit more detail in our application requirements table. Pages 806 and 807 set down the minimum requirements for what you have to include in a subdivision plat. And for the sake of information for our applicants, we've supplemented that table with new columns for family subdivision, limited subdivision, and minor plat, just to clarify that those subdivisions have requirements as well, and that table lists what those are. And that is it for procedures. Questions on procedures? All right, moving along. Districts is our next sort of flavor of groups of changes. Now, remember, we have conditional rezoning districts here in Clayton. There's 3 versions of them. The type 3 conditional rezoning is the one that requires a concept plan and permits an applicant to request deviations or reductions from the standards. Now, in most cases, when it comes to rezoning, rezoning approvals and conditions of approval are considered as legislative decisions that run with the land, okay, in perpetuity. However, these type 3 conditional rezoning concept plans do not enjoy that sort of forever vested status. Rather, they're treated as site-specific vesting plans. They're subject to the maximum vesting terms set down in the statutes and do not run with the land. So we wanted to clarify that in the conditional rezoning procedure. A couple of other adjustments we've made. The downtown core sub-district has a somewhat quirky height provision for corner buildings. You got to have a 2-story building in the downtown, in the DTNC district, but this corner building provision required the building to maintain a height similar to adjacent structures. After further thought, we're just suggesting that that requirement be dropped in favor of the simpler requirement. Just make sure the building is at least 2 stories. Number 3, self-evident, mixed-use development. It's got to comply with the mixed-use design standards in Chapter 6, regardless of the downtown or the mixed-use district where it's located. We clarified in the mixed-use district that there's a maximum street setback, not a minimum street setback. In other words, if you're in the mixed-use district, your building has to be closer to the street. It can be no farther from the street than 20 feet. It could be closer than 20 feet, and that would be fine. It could even be at the back of the sidewalk, but it can be no farther than 20. So we wanted to clarify that because that's incorrect in the current UDO. Residential low density. Okay, these are ETJ properties. These are, residential lots that are 20,000 square feet in size, maybe bigger. And we wanted to clarify in this district that sidewalks may not always be required. There may be instances where sidewalks aren't required in the low density district. And so we'll rely on policy guidance rather than an applicability statement in a district purpose statement. Now, back to the type 3 conditional rezoning. Remember that conditional rezoning procedure permits applicants to request deviations or reductions to standards. Okay, so they can come in and say, I'd rather not provide this design standard or that much parking or this much landscaping, or I'd like a bigger sign, whatever. The type 3 conditional rezoning procedure permits that kind of request, provided the applicant demonstrates that the proposed development will be of a higher quality than would result from an application of the strict standard. Okay, so if you want a reduction, you got to show us how it's going to be better. Okay, we've added a section in here. This section will likely grow over the course of time. And what we've done with these standards is provide some illustrations or examples for how applicants can demonstrate higher quality development, whether that's additional landscaping, provision of EV parking spaces, higher quality traffic light mast arms, better signage, etc. We would expect that this section grow over time as staff adds additional clarity about ways for applicants to demonstrate higher quality development. Okay. Clarification on lot coverage. Clayton has, the UDO basically treats lot coverage as only those areas under buildings or roofs. That's lot coverage. Impervious surfaces like driveways or patios, decks, etc., that's not considered lot coverage under the UDO. Only the land area that is beneath a structure or a roof is considered as lot coverage. Now, there are some approvals in place that were adopted prior to 2023 where that lot coverage definition differs a little bit, and those prior approvals are subject to the rules that were in effect when they were approved. Couple other things in districts. Off-street parking. We have a summary table of setback encroachments in Chapter 3. Inside that table are some provisions that recognize that parking can be located in a required setback. Okay, that's fairly typical. However, in our downtown core and downtown transitional sub-districts, we have what's called an off-street parking setback. And in those instances, off-street parking cannot encroach. So parking setback, no problem. Parking in a parking setback, nope, that's not permitted. So we wanted to add that clarification to the setback encroachment provisions. Questions on districts? Moving right through this stuff. Okay, let's talk about uses. We've added parking and shipping uses. They're permitted by right in the public facility district. We've broadened the range of districts where vehicle towing or storage is permitted by including the commercial conditional zoning district. Okay. One other thing I'll note for you is a subtle change in the language. This use type, vehicle towing or storage, currently reads vehicle towing and storage. And so I wanted to clarify for you guys that these are uses that are, they're towing and they're storage. All right, so bungalow court. We're suggesting a type B buffer instead of a type C, single family attached. All lots in downtown have a 50-foot, with a 50-foot or less width, are rear loaded. We made some adjustments to secondary structures, some clarity about some things that might be permitted in front of the principal dwelling on a larger lot, say a lot that was 2 acres in size or larger, provided those features are at least 2 times the minimum front or street setback. We've added push carts to the mobile restaurant and removed current separation requirements from schools, churches, and cemeteries. We've plucked recreational vehicle parking from several zoning districts. Corridor, both the industrial districts, commercial and industrial conditional, added some clarity to the vehicle towing and storage uses. So some fairly detailed provisions here on accessory uses. Finally, outdoor dining. Outdoor dining can take place on an adjacent lot, but if it does, it's not credited towards open space set-aside standards that we would normally credit outdoor dining towards. So that's it for uses. Questions on that? All right, infrastructure, very, very quickly. If you want to put something in an easement, you need the prior approval of an easement holder. That makes sense. Easements are permitted in passive and active open space set-asides. We have some standards that specify or require minimum connection distances. In other words, if you're within a certain number of feet of an existing water or sewer line, you need to connect to it. Added some clarity that distance is measured as a straight line. Handful of development standard changes. I'm going to move through these fairly quickly. You guys have a busy agenda. Access and circulation. If you're doing redevelopment, in other words, increasing the intensity of your building or your parking or use area by 50% or more, you need to come into compliance with these standards. Single-family attached developments need to be on a parent parcel at least 30 feet wide. We've increased the minimum driveway depth for single-family homes from 20 to 25 feet. Driveways need to be 20 feet apart, whether they're on the same or different lots. We've got some standards for alternative access. That's when 5 or more lots are accessed by a shared access way, and the engineering director can permit a reduction in the width of the access way. More clarity on driveways, specifically that driveway depths are in accordance with NCDOT requirements rather than a flat 100-foot measurement, which is what is in the current regulation. More flexibility about parking lot cross-access location. It can be closer to the street than currently allowed. Some adjustments to mixed-use standards. Primarily, bike lanes are only provided in accordance with adopted policy guidance. Mixed-use parking location, we had some standards that might allow that to happen in the front if you had a taller building. Too complicated, we've dropped that. All parking in a mixed-use district or a mixed-use development needs to be to the side or the rear of the building. Soften the weather protection standards for mixed use. They are only required over windows and doors. Some provisions on multifamily buildings. You only have to be parallel to the street if you're within 100 feet of the street. Couple other changes I do want to note for you. Multifamily building requirements have been increased slightly. For example, multifamily building facade elements are applied to all building facades, not just those fronting streets. Multifamily building articulation standards are required on all sides, not just those that are street facing. We've limited the use of gates across access ways that serve multifamily development. So some changes to multifamily in recognition of a desire to establish a minimum floor of development quality for multifamily so that Clayton can be a little bit more comfortable in its application of those standards. Some adjustments to non-residential design standards. If you are going to add an after-the-fact structure like a cooler or some other kind of aspect on your non-residential building, it needs to comply with the design standards. Architectural features are only counted on the wall where they're located. We've clarified that out parcels on non-residential sites have a minimum number of design features that they need to meet. Softened the requirements for windows on large format retail buildings. Following state statute, we're clarifying that the residential design guidelines apply to triplexes and quadplexes. We may no longer apply design standards to those. We've softened the limitations on concrete foundations for residential structures. We've reduced the distinctly different requirements for architectural variability down from 6 to 4. And then finally, into lighting. Lighting plans need to be prepared by a lighting professional. And then finally, parking. We have supplemented the parking standards to allow gravel to be used for surface parking when a lot is either within or immediately adjacent to a railroad right-of-way, subject to some specific standards. So that's the development standards. That's the bulk of these changes. Any questions on those?
Mr. Sarasky?
Yeah, I don't really have a question. I just have a suggestion on the driveway spacing standards.
Yes.
Might be good to look at this maybe next time that you're reviewing this and talk about the hierarchy of roadways within the town or within the town's ETJ on that driveway spacing. Because as the roads as the areas now are a little more rural but become more suburban and urban, if you let those driveways be 20 feet apart, in 10 years, it's going to look really weird when there's house upon house upon a house on a roadway that is going to be a future arterial. Say 8 homeowners on Vincent Road or one homeowner puts multiple driveways on Vincent Road and they're 20 feet apart when really in the future, there only should be one driveway in that area because of the amount of traffic that's in that area. So I don't know if that's something you all have thought about, creating a hierarchy of roadway and having the driveway be further apart, because that other counties are actually having this problem right now in the state where they because of over time where homeowners subdivided their lot into 4 lots or 6 lots, and they put 6 driveways on an arterial roadway, which is now causing a lot of safety issues. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay. So you're suggesting that we be more careful in applying this and limit. This is an access management suggestion that you're making, that maybe we not allow driveways every 20 feet on arterial or collector streets. And we need to be thinking about long-term as the street moves from, maybe a minor collector or a minor arterial up the food chain to a higher level street.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay, great suggestion.
Any other questions?
Other questions on that one? On the standards?
Yeah, Mr. Applewhite?
Hey, Chad. Sorry, this is actually on the districts. Just very quickly, before we get through it all the way, the methods for demonstrating higher quality development for type 3 conditional, it's on slide 14.
Yes.
It's more or less a question of process. So you said that these were going to be the first examples that we would place into the UDO. How do you all and staff perhaps think about how are you going to go about collecting other alternative ideas that are not included? Because I think some of these are fine, but I also think there are probably better examples that we could include, or maybe a statement of other options could be available by request or something like that to add.
Right. It's a great question. And in fact, we're working with council now on how are we going to deal with the density issue, the yield issue, and situations where applicants are seeking densities that exceed the caps that we've installed, and in some instances exceed those densities by orders of magnitude. And so this is something that we're actively working in now. What is the process that we're going to use for these applications that seek to drastically depart from maximum density? We'll continue to work on this, and I would say if Planning Board has suggestions, that's absolutely something that we're very interested in, and y'all can either forward those to staff, or we can work with staff to schedule some time to sit down and talk with you further about y'all's suggestions. Either way, we're very interested and open to more conversation about the kinds of things that should be included in this section.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Couple more slides and we're done. Anybody else have questions on standards?
Any other board member?
Chad.
Mr. Liscombe?
Chad, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hey, so on development standards, number 15 clarifies max building height of 18 foot within 100 foot of single family detached or attached dwellings. Is that to the top of the wall on the second floor, or is that to the ridge of the roof line?
It's the ridge. It's the ridge.
So basically, everything's got to be 1 story.
No, you can have 2 stories or 18 feet. And I think we measure how we measure pitched roofs, so it's to the midpoint.
Of 18 foot.
What number is that? There it is. Clarifies max building height.
Number 15.
Got it.
I was just thinking about a 9 foot first floor, 8 foot second floor, and then a foot of actual floor structure. You know, that's going to bring you to 18 feet without the roof.
Chair Moore, if I may, I want to say that height is measured on the pitched roof from the midpoint of that roof.
It is.
So that 18
But you
foot,
still would be limited to a 1 story dwelling, basically.
Right. James is suggesting that the 18 feet is insufficient if you had a pitched roof structure, because that roof is going to need to have some pitch, probably of 2 or 3 feet. I think we could raise that to 20 without a significant heartburn. Mr. Lipscomb, what are your thoughts about that?
I was just thinking it in terms of stories. You know, if you have a 1 story or 2 stories, because you're going to have at least 18 foot to facilitate a 2 story building with not including the roof line. So I'm just thinking about neighborhoods where you have a vast majority of 2 story houses. You would be limiting the adjacent multifamily to 1 story instead of 2 stories. So I was just thinking that, 2 stories ought to be stated instead of just an 18 foot. I'm just looking at the application of that. It seems like that would be contradicting the density that you would expect to be getting for multifamily building.
Okay.
When it backs up, you could actually have a much larger building into single family residential next door to it.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, Mr. Lipscomb, I will share that with the town council that you're suggesting we strike the 18 feet and just go with 2 stories.
I think it sounds like that was what the intent was. So I just wanted to clarify that because I'm just thinking about it as an application standpoint. That could affect current projects going forward.
Understood. So yeah, I mean, we will, so one of the things that we do when we present this during the work session and then during the public hearing is to share the input and feedback that we got from, from planning board. So this driveway separation standard that was raised, the enhancements comment that was made, and we'll share this suggestion that we go to 2 stories.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
All right, great. So a couple of minor adjustments. We added a definition of a mid-block alley, and we supplemented the definition for vehicle towing or storage. By the way, it's or, not and. It reads and on page 792. That's an error. It's supposed to say vehicle towing or storage. And those changes were made based on some of the adjustments we made to the accessory use standards. So that is it. I know we've moved through this material quickly, but you guys are getting to be old hands at this. At your pleasure, if you wish to make a recommendation, that would be our desire. Our anticipation is that town council would conduct a work session on these adjustments on the 3rd of September and return for hearing on the 16th of September. If they're approved at that time, we'll revise the Unified Development Ordinance and post it. And we will supplement this presentation with the 3 comment areas that were raised during this discussion. And Mr. Chair, I thank you. That is my presentation, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Meadows. Are there any other questions for Mr. Meadows? Thank you, sir. Are there any comments from the public on this matter? Hearing none, I'll turn it over to the board for their consideration. Are there any comments from the board? If none, I'll entertain a motion to either recommend or not recommend UDOTA 2-24 to the town council. We have a consistency statement that was provided to us. So if there is a motion, would you please review the options before you in the consistency statements? So take a few moments to look them over, and I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I can make a motion at the appropriate time.
Board Member Applewhite?
And one quick thing before I do that. Chad, we appreciate you putting this together, and I'm sure the slideshow gets put together as you prepare for these meetings. But anytime in the future that you can send that to us ahead of time, I think that would be helpful to have as well, in addition to the other materials, just as a something for us to go through it, help guide some thinking as we set up here. But appreciate that hard work. Mr. Chair, I'll make the motion to for approval, consistent with the 2045 Comprehensive Growth Plan, the Unified Development Ordinance text amendment based on the consistency with the adopted 2045 Comprehensive Growth Plan, and that Goal LU1 seeks to preserve the character of Clayton while allowing for growth and development in appropriate areas. Policy LU 1.1 manages future growth and encourages quality development through the implementation of the comprehensive plan, the Unified Development Ordinance, and other plans and regulations adopted by the Town Council. And strategy LU 1.13 reviews and updates the UDO within 1 to 2 years to ensure consistency with the goals, policies, and strategies of the comprehensive growth plan. This action is reasonable and in the public interest in that the 2045 comprehensive growth plan encourages an up-to-date unified development ordinance, and the request is compatible with providing a relevant and community-reflective land use regulatory framework.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'd like to offer a second with one caveat. I'd like to just add that we had those 3 recommendations that we would like presented to the council for their consideration.
And could you list it?
Okay, we'll have to, I'm gonna need some help with that, Conrad. I remember the one that I spoke about, but I can't.
Sure, Chair Moore, if I may, I was listening to Chad's recap and all yours keep recap. It sounds like for us to, Chad, I'm sure you have some notes here, but the 3 items are driveway separations, enhancements for the conditional rezonings, and consideration of the 18-foot to just be 2 stories for the multifamily building height.
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Great, thank you.
We have a second with the caveats listed by the planning director. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, planning
Thank you
board.
very much. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
All righty. Next item on the agenda is item 4B, Downtown Master Plan Recommendation.
Good evening, Chair, members of the board. We have Mr. Dan Lambert here, consultants with McAdams LLC, to present the Town of Clayton Downtown Master Plan. This project is close to 2 years in the making. It was presented to the Downtown Development Advisory Board, I want to say last month. No, just this month in August, and they did do a unanimous recommendation for approval. So this plan is now intended to go before the planning board and then onwards to council. So without further ado, Mr. Dan Lambert, who is joining us remotely.
Thank you, Conrad. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Let me, all right, and can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Board, thank you for having me tonight to review with you the changes that we've made to the downtown plan in hopes of seeking your recommendation for approval. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly, and we are going to focus on the front half of the document, with the second half primarily being the inventory and analysis data, which is information that really has not changed since it was first presented to y'all some time ago. So we're gonna focus on the content of the plan itself and the changes that have been made there at the recommendation of both the Downtown Board and yourselves, and through some of our later stage input sessions. So without further ado, I'm going to scroll through the document here, and we're going to talk about the sections where things have significantly changed. There have been some clerical edits, much like you heard in your prior presentation, items where there were typos or the words needed slight amendments. I'm not going to refer to those particularly, just those that are kind of formative to the plan. So we will start once we get to the content of our progress. A couple of items in here refer to the conversations with the North Carolina Railroad and the difficulties that had occurred with that, but we've revised that to imply that there's progress despite the difficulties, and that conversations are still continuing. We also made reference to the 2010 master plan and how it was very aggressive in its recommendations for redevelopment and for adaptive reuse, and a lot of that unfortunately did not occur between 2010 and this go around. So we definitely wanted to make reference to the fact that that was a very ambitious plan for the time. The plan itself, the vision statement, y'all had the pleasure of seeing this not too terribly long ago. Definitely started to bring some cohesion to the remainder of the plan. There have been ever so slight changes to the downtown districts that were added. You'll see an extension to the west of the downtown development district. We've refined the historic downtown core per recommendations, and the overall downtown boundary has been refined as well. We're going to continue to move on through. On the future land use map, this one, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see some of these changes. There were 3 requested changes to this map. One was to add the National Historic Registry boundary, the downtown historic district boundary, that's here in blue. And there were a couple of areas of parcels where the land use designation changed. One of those being this parcel here, which is McWade's Inn parcel at 2nd and Smith Street. And then the parcels at the end of Crescent, which previously had been shown as downtown support, have been moved back to a downtown neighborhood district. And you'll see that western extension of the downtown development district in this, along with the new boundary. I'm gonna do some navigation over here. All right, within the zoning map recommendations, we added some text to those 2 new districts, the historic downtown core and the downtown development district, to explain the differences between the 2 and the reasoning behind them, particularly with the historic downtown core, referring to the intent to preserve the character of that district while still attracting investment and redevelopment where possible. And then also within both of these districts to establish the need for architectural standards to enforce the character elements that we'd like to see in both districts. All right, we're going to get to some of the recommendations in the traffic, transportation, and parking. These have been aligned with the transportation plan that y'all are going through on the Move Clayton exercise. These particular turn lanes on page 23, the question was raised if these were feasible with the road profile and the existing sidewalks that are there. Measurements were taken to verify that, yes, each of these are possible as stated, so they are remaining in there as they were originally quoted. There was a recommendation for changing the posted speed limit on the western end of Main Street, and the wrong intersection was quoted, so it has been revised from Moore Street. It used to say Moore Street, it now says Robertson Street, pardon me. There was a section in here that talked about the closing of 2 of the railroad crossings. They previously were Church Street and Fayetteville Street. That has been revised to reflect it as Church Street and to realign the western end of Stallings so that the Stallings crossing no longer occurs and that Stallings remains north of that rail corridor until it connects further to the west. Reference to the BRT study and Clayton's participation has been expanded to actually discuss where it currently stands and to talk about the continuation of pursuing opportunities within that process. when we get to parking, you'll see this bolded section. This is very important to a lot of folks in the room, and has been important in every input that we've taken, which is whatever solution the future presents, any parking lost to streetscape improvements shall be replaced within a reasonable walking distance from the original locations. So emphasizing that anything that's taken away in terms of parking along the Main Street corridor in particular would be replaced in count and not all concentrated at one end or the other, but within a reasonable distance. Recommendation was made for a formal parking study. And just make sure that I think that is it within this. There have been discussions as well, and I shared some code text from other municipalities about a parking payment in lieu for reduced parking counts within the downtown. So that is something that is going to be reflected in the recommendations as a UDO edit, is to give opportunities for, well, you'll notice as we get a little farther along that some of the parcels within the downtown development district are fairly narrow, and surface parking options are going to be limiting to redevelopment. But there are preferred parking, shared parking opportunities nearby in most cases. So the opportunities to actually have reduced parking requirements within your crafted development code, your UDO code that goes with these districts is there, but the intent is for anybody who seeks those to pay towards potential future parking solutions, whether those be surface or structure.
Can I make one or ask or make one comment or ask? I don't know if this is a comment.
Yes.
Chair.
Yeah, Mr.
Thank you. Is there a way that we can make those dependent on density? Because
Yes.
to me, it doesn't make any sense to allow less parking if there's not the density's not there. So there's got to be some sort of correlation between the amount of density in a certain area or a certain block relative to parking.
Yes, that is possible. It's all in crafting of the text.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And just as a general note, Chair, I apologize, I do need to leave in a couple minutes, but I do want to mention one thing about this plan. In my opinion, there's not enough density in this plan for a downtown. I'm just going to state this now because I'm not going to have time later to do this. There's not enough density in here. There's a couple places where we have competing interests. If we talk about a commuter rail station and a commuter rail study, you need density for commuter rail. And we're leaving the downtown historic core area at a height requirement that's less than what would be needed for a commuter rail station. So as we think about what we really want the future of the downtown, I understand there's a huge push from the public to keep small town feel. I think we can keep small town feel with density. I do believe that's possible. I believe it's been possible in other places, but do recognize that you have competing interests if you want it to be small town feel with low density or lower height or height restrictions with a commuter rail station. Anywhere you've ever seen a commuter rail station built in this country, it's been high density, very, multi-story buildings around that because that's where density should be, around commuter rail stations. So I just want to put that out there as a thing I just want to make everyone aware of, that there's some conflicting things in here between density and what we think we want for the future of this town.
Okay. I appreciate that. And as a reminder to the other board members, the two densities that we refer to in those districts for that historic core is a 2 to 4 story max. And outside of that is 6-story max. So 4 to 6 is the preferred for the downtown development. Thank you. All right. So within the bicycle and pedestrian improvements, there was mention of the street crossings and the improvements associated with that. We have imagery for the bump outs at intersections added, and there's also imagery in here to show that preferred grade separated crossing location a few pages farther. at Lombard. That's the first place where the height actually gets to where we could actually put a tunnel underneath. Within the other bike and ped recommendations, we've added language for the projects that are within the LAPP, and we have updated everything to match what has occurred between the original writing of these and today, and to give preference to fill in the gaps in between. So it also has accounted for those changes that I mentioned in which rail crossings should close to make sure that the pedestrian improvements at the rail crossings reflect the same information. All right, let's see. Pardon me, 1 second. All right. We did include Municipal Park in the conversation of the priority for connectivity, and that includes the Greenway Connector Trail. Kind of blurred all those together along the rail corridor. The decorative safety fence, there's some examples, example imagery in there for what we'd like to see adjacent to the rail corridor that protects pedestrians, but has enough character to be something decent. In the long-term Main Street streetscape recommendations, there had been an item talking about removing parking from one side of Main Street and dedicating a bike lane. That has been removed. With the Greenway Trail as a recommendation, there's really no need. That's redundant to have the dedicated bike trail on Main Street. So when you've got one a half block behind it, it doesn't make sense to have both. So it's been removed. In the other downtown improvements, again, the LAPP projects have been brought to light and added to the mix. And we've adapted things to incorporate the Greenway Trail that was mentioned and the removal of the proper rail crossings. For the downtown events, the primary one is, well, there's a couple. First, we removed the near-term recommendation 3 that was talking about road closure plans for large events. You already have that agreement with NCDOT, and that's not something that needs to be entered into again. You just continue what you're already doing. And then the recommendations for band shell, we've talked about this, about studying the possibility for those events to be moved to Municipal Park, or whether or not it makes sense to keep some of them downtown. And if they are downtown, what makes sense in terms of stage function. So you'll see some changes in there that are along that line of thinking. On the infrastructure improvements, a regional there's been a downtown stormwater analysis that sounds like it's going to be completed here soon, if it hasn't already been. But rather than spending our time talking about a new regional analysis, it's taking the information from that, identifying the capacity needed, and identifying trigger points, which expansion of the needed capacity would occur at anticipated planned growth rates. So one more layer needs to be added to that study for downtown to identify what infrastructure projects will be needed as you reach certain population triggers. And then we were asked about, in the long term, pursuing utility conversion from overhead to underground. So that's been added as well. There was a question about, under the text, the recommended text amendments, the need for review authorities. The point to having that as one of the sections that needs revision is primarily for the architectural guidelines that would be associated with the downtown districts and the need to give them authority so that you actually have some teeth to that ordinance. So that is why it is there and has remained. Additionally, the architectural guidelines themselves, a section has been added for that to be incorporated as a part of the ordinance. And then in favor of talking about the character of these relative to those architectural guidelines of these two new districts, some of the building examples that you saw in prior presentations have been incorporated, along with descriptions of what the historic downtown core and downtown development district would intend for architectural character and height. The intention of this is to have that be the primary focus, and we have actually removed the individual development opportunity plans that were in this for the longest time because those have drawn a lot of attention as people believing that is exactly what's going to happen. And the intention of those was really to see what is possible, to look at what the kinds of densities are that we could actually have happen in areas that seem like they're prime for redevelopment. So the focus on the detail of those became kind of prohibitive to progress for certain aspects of the plan. So those have actually been removed from the plan altogether in favor of some of these guiding principles, which is really what the plan is intended for. So you'll see that this has been added in favor of those plans, or in replacement for those plans, to show what the character might be. All right, the implementation section has been cleaned up significantly, and other elements have been added, including the page numbers that each of these concepts is located on, proper scale of level of funding based on like $1 to $6 signs. And then we've really looked at the years for possible implementation, starting 1 to 5 and cascading up to 20 plus. And then if something is a code or a policy or is a program or study, that's been identified as well. And then where the expenditure comes from, if it's primarily a public expenditure versus if there's private dollars involved. And then operating or capital, you'll see an O or C or sometimes both as to where the funding comes for each. You'll see the reflecting of the things I mentioned before, the change from Moore Street to Robertson Street on the speed limit changes. So really everything that I mentioned before has been brought through to this. The rail closure language, you'll see the realignment of Stalling Street and closing that crossing as opposed to Fayetteville being the second closure. So Church remains as the other closure. Let me just make sure there's nothing else reflected in here that y'all haven't already heard of. Where these concepts are either taken directly or in parallel with something that resides in the pedestrian plan or the LAPP or the transportation plan, those items have a flag now in here that says where those originated from. So this parallels all of those. And I think that is the majority of it. It has been expanded to include more within the infrastructure section, and then to kind of give a little better description to each of these UDO plan amendments or UDO text amendments. And that is it, because everything that follows that is the inventory analysis information that I mentioned before, which is all something you've seen It will get cleaned up a little. The maps will be enlarged so that you have a little better time seeing that information and how it relates directly. But beyond that, that's the only change that'll happen within the appendix for the final draft, is that kind of reformatting to have it read easier. That is all I've got for you.
Any
Are
questions?
there any questions or anything that y'all see is missing or might need me to revisit?
Yes. Any questions for Mr. Lambert? Mr. Applewhite?
Just a quick clarification. In the staff report, it mentions that the Downtown Development Advisory Board requested that a couple of items be removed, including the removal of the item that would have called for the removal of on-street parking on Barber Street, and then the other parking issue, the partnerships with developers and the development plans. If you were at that meeting, can you speak, or maybe staff can speak to their thoughts on those items being removed, and if there's any justification that they should be included, even though they request that they be removed?
Hey, Dan, are you available to answer that question?
Yeah, it sounded to me like it was directed at staff. If y'all thought there was, or other board members, if there was reason to keep those two items that were removed from the discussion, which the parking on Barber was removed from the document. That recommendation is no longer in here. I apologize for missing that in my summary. And the other was discussion of public and private parking ventures, and there is language in here that has been added to talk about that specifically, but there is not a specific recommendation tied to it.
Yeah, that's helpful. I guess what I was asking is more or less the summary of that discussion that went on with the DDA and how they went about requesting those. Essentially, was it a couple of board members that had this clear cut and handed over to y'all, or was there discussion that maybe we should be aware of as we consider this and other changes?
Thank you, Board Member Applewhite. So I want to recall the discussion was on Barber Street. There didn't seem to be a strong need, since I want to say that's a one-way street, to remove the parking there on Barber Street for that recommendation. That's the specific to that one, to the TPPK 22. So it would be that there's enough width there to accommodate both on-street parking and have one lane of travel direction. So if you were to remove the parking, then you would be creating, additional travel lanes, but you still have that one. I think the kind of overall arching theme here is we want to try to retain as much parking as possible in downtown. That's a big overarching theme of the DDA's discussion. And I think the removal of on-street parking was kind of discouraged.
So just for additional information, the original recommendation for that removal came from Ramey Kemp's original study as a part of this plan. Primarily because of how narrow that street is, and it was more potential conflict concern for both safety and for traffic flow. So it was not, ultimately it's not a huge issue because the speed limit is quite slow and the angled parking is pretty easy to maneuver. So it's not critical that it be removed. It was just a recommendation that if you saw fit and even considered potential for two-way traffic in the future, that was a possibility.
All right, that works. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lambert, could you turn to page 73? Okay, I just wanted to make sure, and this is a final draft, but just taking a quick cursory look, yeah, I noticed something, just a quick glance, and this being a final draft, it really caught my attention. Just at a quick glance, I looked at the population growth from 2010 to 2022, and I saw that the growth for Clayton was 117%, and I knew that 17,385 to 27,678, that was incorrect. Just a quick cursory glance. I knew that percentage growth was incorrect. So that's one mistake. But then when you turn to page 78, I believe you meant that the correct number should have been 37,678. But that piqued my interest. But even then, looking at the data, because I live in Clayton, and the whole data instrument I knew was flawed, because even if you live in Clayton, if you Google multiple websites, you'll see that Clayton's current population, from census data and everywhere, is currently listed anywhere between 26,000 and 30K. So that data set, just being in there, even if you found it from the past, we knew that you were working on a hypothesis that was incorrect when we started working on this in 22 or 23. So that bothered me, that we had a data set that we knew was incorrect when we started on this downtown master plan. And in fact, on Clayton's website, on the economic development, it has the current population at 28,306. So we had a working data set, and you're the consultant. So we had a working data set. Even if you found old data that showed Clayton's population growth from 2010 to 2022, from 17,385 to 37,678, we knew that was incorrect because Clayton's population is a little under 30,000 now.
Is that counting the ETJ though in this?
No, we're talking about the town of Clayton. So I knew that data set was incorrect. So that bothered me. So I started looking at the numbers, and then I looked at then on page 81, I looked at the downtown core. And then I looked at your downtown core for 2022. You had the downtown core population estimated at 2,593. And I looked at the downtown core, and I said, this might be, I'll give it, let's say it's 400 single-family housing units. And I'm being generous. And let's say 3.5 people live in each, let's say 500. And I'm being generous. Let's say it's 500 single-family units currently, and 22 that was in the downtown core. And it's 3.5 people living in the 500 dwelling units. That would bring about 1,750 people. So a data set of 2,593, that's improbable. So I'm looking at all of the data, and I'm just a layperson. I'm like, there are a lot of data sets in here, and I'm quite sure other people saw it, that are highly improbable from a working data set. It looks good, but the veracity of it, the validity is just not there on a lot of the data sets that are here. So I'm looking at, how did we get here when we know that it's highly improbable on the current, not the future, on the current downtown core, because we know that Main Street and 2nd Street is primarily commercial. And then we look at what is the current downtown core, or what the downtown core would have been in 2022. Then you look at what would have been the single family units to be, but in 2022, and let's say 3.5 people per dwelling unit, you would have needed almost, 800 single family units in the downtown core in 22, which any person, reasonable person driving in the current downtown core would have known that doesn't exist. So the veracity of a lot of the data sets, they're not valid. So as you go through the numbers, I'm just trying to say, and the numbers drive the hypotheses on the 1 to 5 year and the 6 to 10 year goals for the town of Clayton, which also drives the cost. Because when you look at some of your wants, because a lot of your wants, there also what's missing is the return on investment. So there are a lot of things that are missing, and I think a lot of the downtown folks, I didn't see a lot of the return on investment. I see some high dollar stuff, and I see the dollar signs that these are high cost things, and they got $4 and $5 signs. But what was missing was the return on investment for the town of Clayton. But I saw these inflated population numbers on the estimates, and to me, the data sets throw everything off. So when you get back and start crunching the numbers, because all of this for the town of Clayton is based on what will the population in the downtown core, what will Clayton's population be in 5 or 10 years? Not what because we know that Clayton in 2022, town of Clayton, it wasn't 38,000. So we don't know the town of Clayton, what it will be in 5 or 10 years, because right now, you didn't provide for the town of Clayton, you provided for Johnson County. There was no data set for 2029 or 2030 for the town of Clayton in the document. If you look at the document, there is no estimates for the town of Clayton for 2035, when these 5 and 10 year. So if you look at your document for town of Clayton projected out, there is no 5 or 10 year population estimate for the town of Clayton in the future. All of that's in the past. The 22 estimates, that does the town of Clayton itself. If they're going to fund the town of Clayton's town council, if they're going to fund these things for the future, they can't fund it on old data sets. Those 2022 estimates that were never came to fruition, they can't fund on that. That's in the past, and it didn't come to fruition. So if I'm a council person, I can't fund on past data sets that were incorrect anyway. They didn't come to fruition. I have to fund on future population estimates. You gave me Johnson County for 27. You gave me downtown core, but your current downtown core is incorrect. There are not 2593 people living in downtown core. So I can't trust your future downtown core estimates because your current is incorrect. So if I understand it as a council person, I can't trust the future data set because the current data set is incorrect. So I'm looking at this as an elected official. How do I move forward? So
if you go back to page 71, you'll see the source for Kathleen Rose, her market analysis, the data sources that she pulled from. This is the collective information that she came up with those numbers from. And since that's the world that she plays in, I have trusted her numbers. So I can consult with her and see if she's in agreement or if there's a different perspective that perhaps we're both missing here. That got to that spot, because I can't personally speak to it without knowing what her methodology was in that collective set of data landing on those numbers. Now, adding a projection, she does have projections per year, so we can do the math to get to those interim numbers for the town as well. So that I can provide to you after doing that exercise. But If there's concern that the original numbers were wrong, I need to verify with her first the methodology that got us there, see where those numbers came from, and see if, the start of this list is the Census Bureau. And then economic analysis, housing and urban development. Those are generally pretty trusted demographic sources. So if that's where this originated from, I would tend to believe those are the same types of numbers you're going to get in every plan that's brought before you, whether it's your comprehensive plan, your transportation plan, your bike and ped plan, Parks and Rec master plan. They're all going to bring those same numbers. So let me verify with her. Because if there's some other math equation or something that got to where that isn't, I don't want to say good practice, because she's the person who does that stuff all the time. I'm not. Whatever got to those numbers, it'd be good to know. If you believe that this is all based on flawed data, we're in a whole different world of hurt, and I'm not going to jump to that conclusion based on a couple of Google searches, but I will find out what the true source of this information is, and I will go through the exercise of finding projections for you that match the numbers that she took in her market analysis. Now, the one thing that is potentially different between when we started this process and now is that we were getting data from 2022. Obviously, it's been 2 years since then. Things have changed. But I don't think it has changed that you are seeing lesser growth. I think, if anything, you're seeing greater growth. So there might be even a different factor in the projection calculations. But let me consult with Kathleen and find out the exact nature of those numbers before we go off the deep end, thinking that the whole thing is suspect. There's, like I said, she does it all the time as her job, market analysis and research. So there's got to be some methodology to it that has some logic. And so let's ask that question of her. I will ask that of her and bring the answer to you. But yeah, I can't speak directly to whether it seems like that's the right count. And I also need to double check. The downtown boundary we were working with has grown from then to now. So there might actually be a different collection of housing and number of units and population. So let's answer those questions before we throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No, sir, I'm not trying to throw the baby. The first one on page 73 was just for a final draft, it was just a blatant error, number one. So,
Yes. Yeah,
okay, let's be clear on that.
Yes, sir.
And number two, the data set, you had data that from 2022 that, let's be clear now, before we go back, the first one, page 73, was a blatant error.
Yes, sir.
The data set with the projection to 2022, my statement was you used a data set with a population estimate that had a data set that had Clayton's population 30% higher than the actual population that we know that it is. And my point was, when you're working on something, if you know that the data set is incorrect, don't use the data set. It may have been a projection at the time, but now that you know that the data set is incorrect, move away from it. It was a projection. I'm quite sure it was a projection. But now that we factually know that that projection is not correct, move to a different data set. That's what I was saying.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that.
I'm not saying that was not a projection at once upon a time. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that now we know that actually Clayton's population is not 38,000. Move to a different data set.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other board member? No.
I appreciate both of your comments. And I agree 1,000%. One of the things I wanted to make sure of is that the DDA was heard, and I was very much concerned about, making sure that my recommendation fell in line with their recommendation. So I think that has been stated well by them, and I think that, I know I talked to the chair and the vice chair, and I think that they feel like they're being heard and we're in a good position there. I do think that we have to get past the adoption of a plan so we can get moving with some hopeful improvements. I love what you said about everything, and especially the return on investment, and looking at what type of return the investment the town council makes is going to have in the private sector and in tax revenue, income, et cetera. So I appreciate both of your time and efforts and your comments on that. And I'm supportive of the plan. There's some things in there that I know I could nitpick if I wanted to, but overall, I think it's a good plan, and it gives us a direction to go in. And I think the big thing is starting to try to not necessarily implement the exact plan, but use it as a guide to make things happen, and to hopefully make things happen quickly. And to remove, obstacles and barriers where they're unnecessary obstacles and barriers, and to try to make pass forward instead of obstacles. So, I'm hopeful that that's where we end up. And we look back at this a year or 2 or 3 years from now and say, some actual good things have come that were rooted in this work. But I really feel like at a point, we've got to get past that. But I do agree that if you don't have good input, you're not going to have good output. And we've got to be able to trust those numbers and look at that return on investment, because the town is a corporate entity, that needs to foster the development of the private sector in every way humanly possible, and to help make things happen in downtown. So that's my 2 cents.
Any other comments from the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion to, I'm sorry, stop. Is there any member of the public that'd like to comment on this item? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve or not to approve. We have a consistency statement that's been presented to us on this item. Please review the 4 options. Take a moment to review them, and then I'll entertain a motion from a member of the board.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion when appropriate.
We have Board Member Applewhite.
Mr. Chairman, I'll recommend approval consistent with the 2045 growth plan. I make the motion to recommend approval, Town of Clayton Downtown Master Plan based on the consistency with the adopted 2045 Comprehensive Growth Plan, and that Chapter 3, Think Downtown, provides goals, policies, and strategies that are supported in the proposed Downtown Master Plan. Chapter 9, Action as an implementation step for goal DT1, calls for updating the existing Town of Clayton Downtown Master Plan. This action is reasonable and in the public interest, in that the Comprehensive Growth Plan calls for an update to the Town of Clayton Downtown Master Plan as an implementation step, and the Downtown Master Plan supports the goals, policies, and strategies found in Chapter 3 of the Comprehensive Growth Plan.
We have a motion by Board Member Applewhite. Is there a second?
Second.
Have a second by Board Member Liscum. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Motion passes. Thank you.
Chair
Thank
Moore,
you all
if I
for
may,
your time and consideration.
For the record, was there a nay I heard?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Any new business? Item 5, new business.
So real quick for a clarification, I got 5 votes in favor and 1 vote against with Chairman
Yes.
Warren up, and thank you. So to the new updates, we have, I wanted to say there was a new update. We got the comprehensive transportation plan is underway right now. So as the Unified Development Ordinance text amendment brought before you this evening, the Downtown Master Plan brought before you this evening. I want to thank the board for your time and your patience with these presentations, and also for your flexibility with our presenters who are both, several hours away from us. So I want to thank the board for that, and to look forward to the comprehensive transportation plan that's forthcoming. We're hoping to bring that, hopefully wrapping that up this fall and getting adopted by council. Lots of good work being done with that with our consultants, WSP. And we will be working on the next round of text amendments with Chad Meadows with CodeWright, again, to bring before you some additional text amendments. A lot of those text amendments were provided to us at the time of the UDO's original adoption. So we're looking at, staff is catching up with some public comment provided to us last fall. And I'm very happy that we're able to go line item by line item with Chad, and appreciate your all's time and energy into helping us keep our UDO up to date. No other comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now we have an opportunity for informal discussion and public comment. Yeah. Any informal discussion amongst the board? Thank you. I really appreciate everybody coming out. We've had a great summer. When the summer vacation is over, I guess we'll finish out the year. Going through the fall. I don't know if we have a heavy agenda going through the fall or not. Finishing out the year. Welcome, Miss. I can't. Could you pronounce your last name, Miss Duquesne?
Duchesne.
Duchesne.
Yes.
Now, welcome aboard. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Chair Moore, I forgot to introduce Audrey Duchesne, our senior planner. We also have Whitney Murphy, our planner 1. We also have a planning technician, Miss Susan Long. So we do have some additional staff. I'm very thankful to that. We're getting some other assistance from the Mid-Carolina Council of Governments as well. So your planning department is fully staffed and working hard.
Well, thank you very much. If there are no other discussion or comments from the public, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Board Member Dupree. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Board Member Liscum. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We adjourn.